that way. Raouf here symbolizes the opportunist model of an intellectual. Said basically was very much concerned by Raouf's transformation. He sold his values, he betrayed Said's own doctrine, and stripped Said of his life meaning. It basically delegitimized and shook Said's core beliefs. Raouf's portrayal is very significant as he symbolically represents the class of opportunist intellectuals that arose with the 1952 revolution and was seen to betray the working class. Working class here is represented by Said Mahran, the protagonist, the thief. The opportunist basically who used to speak for social justice, etc. But with the rise of 1952 and the destruction of the bourgeois, a new, inefficient, corrupt, bureaucratic cadre was created. And with that, a group of opportunist intellectuals, basically there was a transformation into an opportunist intellectuals. The reading of Said's relationship with Raouf can also reflect the working class, the intellectual working class dilemma. One can see how it is, if certain intellectuals get co-opted, it will adversely affect some of the working class if they perceive these intellectuals as role models. As I read Miramar as well, the intellectual working class relationship is portrayed similarly but ends very different in Miramar, where Zohra, who I saw as representing the working class, was independent from Sarhan, the co-opted intellectual. She got independent by the end of the movie, which I can very much see as a call for the independence of the working class from the corrupt, opportunist intellectual group of intellectuals. It's not necessarily Raouf and Said Mahran's relationship is not an individual struggle between just two characters, but rather it's a socio-political struggle that shows the failure of the intellectual class, that highlights it very much. They failed to bring the working class their dream, they failed to help them with their struggle. And the struggle of Said Mahran can also be seen as a Robin Hood anarchic struggle against an oppressive authority that promised the working class a dream but was seen to fail to bring it to them. Said referred explicitly to his anarchic belief when asked what can one need in this nation, and he replied simply stating, a gun and a book. The gun basically symbolizes the violent, revolutionary, anarchic spirit, and the book is a very vivid representation of socialist or anarchic, maybe, ideology or form of knowledge. Can generally refer to a form of knowledge as well. Hence, the idea of using violence to attain social justice. It's important to highlight that Mahfouz represents only a segment of the intellectuals taking this ideological stance or being opportunists. Raouf is depicted as one of the so-called intellectuals who were seen to have benefited of the system, and this is exceptionally noteworthy as it sheds light on the inefficiencies and the corruptness of the revolutionary 1952 system. It's also important to link these transformations to various intellectuals who were extremely supportive of the 1952 revolution but had to adapt by the 60s, when the revolution basically failed to bring their core values that they used to preach, such as social equality in this case. Basically, Raouf could be seen as one route some intellectuals take to adapt with the 1952 revolution, which is the opportunist intellectual route or the vested interest route, and Said can be seen as the Robin Hood mode of an intellectual. I then move to discuss The Beggar, الشحاذ. نجيب محفوظ is the beggar. It's set in post-1952 Nasserite Egypt as well. It surrounds around Omar Hamzawi, the protagonist, that is astray in an existentialist crisis. Omar, Mustafa, Buthaina, and Uthman are the four intellectuals that Mahfouz sheds light on their life transformation to adapt or continue reject after the regime basically fails to supply their core values or bring them their core values and dreams. But this novel specifically does not just focus on the regime's authoritarian, oppressive sense, but rather a quite important, or just as important aspect, which is the oppressive society sense blended in with the regime's oppressiveness. To start with, Omar is shown as the bourgeois intellectual who is a poet but decides to give it up and instead becomes a lawyer. The novel surrounds around the phase of Omar's life where he becomes the beggar. Why is he called the beggar? Because he begs people, he begs God, he begs everything in the universe to find a sign to explain his life meaning. Omar attempts to find his reason for existence through various methods that start with searching for love, or sex, or agnosticism, and he finally ends up with self-imposed exile. One of the main prevalent themes that Mahfouz endeavors to illustrate is societal misunderstanding in this novel. Omar feels stranded by how society very much judges him. But the problem is not just with the regular society, but also with how even the closest people to him, closest friends, closest family, judge him and do not understand him. And he feels frustrated by their lack of understanding and by their lack of comprehension. And by the fact that they fail to provide him with concrete answers to his questions. Omar exemplifies the type of intellectual that feels superior to the society, elite to the society, and hence is not able to share his dilemma with the people around him. His isolation stems primarily not from feeling superiority, but rather the fact that he attempted to share his agony multiple times with friends and family, but they do not understand, they do not share the same understanding. The result was his relationship with the people was one characterized by a feeling of superiority and contempt. The relationship is very similar to Said, the protagonist, the protagonist in The Thief of Dogs, relationship with the society, whereby it's characterized by hostility, revenge, and basically a society that Said perceives as decadent. And so does Omar Hamzawi, the protagonist of The Beggar. This also is stemming from a lack of understanding and hence a lack of help from everyone around him, including obviously the state and the society. To further elaborate on the society's misunderstanding as projected by Mahfouz, Omar is projected to have had three phases: the revolutionary socialist, the bourgeois elite, and the poet. Quitting the first two, the revolutionary socialist and the poet, basically explains how he cannot fight the system anymore. Quitting the poet is very, very significant here because society did not perceive science and art going hand in hand together. One cannot do science while doing art. One cannot be a lawyer while being a poet. And hence he gave up on trying to fight for being both and ended up quitting on being a poet. Revolutionary socialist quit on it because of the oppressive state and because the state failed to bring these socialist values, that he ended up quitting on it and quitting fighting. Why did he quit fighting? This is very significant and relevant to Uthman, who is his friend and his activist friend, who was imprisoned multiple times because of his revolutionary spirit and revolutionary activism, fighting for socialist values. So he ended up seeing this experience and decided to quit fighting for it, and ended up being the bourgeois intellectual that thinks more of the existentialist crisis, God, religious crisis related reasoning for existence, etc., rather than fighting a society. On the other hand, as I said, Uthman is very significant because he exemplified how one fails to change the context during the Nasserite era. It's basically quitting for Omar Hamzawi was a method of adaptation instead of